So the 80s were obviously a very important and pivotal decade, I think. I think it's fair to say, for Ed. And it was pretty much defined, by AIDS and HIV. And he was quite an activist and really, very profoundly affected, as most gay people who were out at that time, and had a lot of friends who had become ill or passed away. And so there was a lot of work done in this realm. Earlier, if you had caught the first vignette, sorry, we're in New York and it's always loud. This piece is sort of like, I think of it as sort of his version of the quilt. And this is a piece that Isaac had mentioned he had been working on for quite some time, and in fact, it still isn't finished. You can see a candle here that's sketched out that wasn't completed. These candles actually are quite amazing, and they are literally done with candle wax, so it's almost like encaustic. I guess it is encaustic. And but anyway, it's just very interesting, the tactility. But this text, you may actually be able to see it from the video, because actually taking a picture sometimes of complex things like this is easier to read it. But there is the word death written in upper and lower case, and that exact same, we've encountered that word drawn out other places and done in pen and ink. So it was very intentional. But it says, and we finally were able to I was looking at it last night and finally figured out that next thing. And it says, death, not knowing who's next. So, and the not knowing and who's next is in all caps. And it's interesting that there are also two different types of lettering. The not and then knowing is sort of like Helvetica or something. But Isaac has an interesting observation of stenciling, which you might want to comment on in terms of you noted it in a number of different places and sort of what you think the referencing there is.
What do you mean, to John's or to those other artists?
Yeah.
Well, there's another piece where it's a little bit more overt that we're going to look at, but he had shown at Castelli. He was encountering all these artists. He has a piece that says Unreadable, where he's playing around with it. Text, I can see allusions to Bruce Naumann's kind of text pieces. I can see allusion to Ed Richet or conversations with, maybe not allusions, not the right way to say it, but also to Jasper Johns, the way he's using stencils. And even a really good friend of his was Neil Jenny, and the way that Neil Jenny would title things on the bottom. There are different types of font and how artists would manually construct text, in these periods before you're just having something printed out.
But Ed's normal handwriting, like if he always wrote instructions in terms of how to handle his artwork and install it. And that was always done in sort of very classical writing, like an architect would do. At least to me, it always looks like architectural writing, don't you think? Yeah. So this is not how Ed normally writes.
Yeah, this is very time consuming. I don't know if you can see it. And also, some of these are mirrored, some of these are backwards. This is registered off. There is, there's a skeleton here. There's floral and vine patterns inside of here. He's obfuscating the text by adding it. And then in here, you can tell that this is growing. These are, I'm assuming they're people he knew. There are some just kind of, with all this deliberateness, it's just kind of, also let me add this one in.
Yeah, there are a lot of names just handwritten in all over the place that we were looking at, like last night in these white areas. And some of them word wrap, or he does them as like, Robert M, Robert O, but then some are just Roger. And so there's, Sam, Scott. So there's not a regularity with the way he's doing this, but this is almost like, I feel like his version of a quilt. Don't you?
Yeah.
And then the trio of candles. But they're even below what Isaac even commented here with the flowers and things like that. There is so much layering underneath. There's like 10 layers of things on this piece that are sort of growing out. But again, many of these motifs and the biological things, the flowers and stuff that we commented in the first segment, you see here, and this was, easily 20, 25 years later. So that's what we were saying, is that what he was doing in those deconstructions back in the early 60s have been pervasive through all of his work.
You can see a relation with the lattice forms too, the way the structure and the angles. I just saw some of these are going, there's names going this way, there's names going that way and that way. And the dense layering of it. And the other thing about his work is that it's the continuousness. It's not like this is a piece and then it's done. It's always in flux and moving just like his life, and that's kind of an overarching theme that we've kind of looked at.
Well, it also became like HIV and AIDS. I mean, the death just didn't stop magically in like 1988 or something, It continued on, and a lot of people today who still are, positive or, in and out of it. But what's interesting is, to that point, is every work of paper of Ed's is just riddled with pinholes, and sometimes it starts falling off in the corners from being, put up and down so many times. But it doesn't detract from the work, and it certainly doesn't detract from the message of the power of the work. And I think that's what has gotten both of us is that the work is so dynamic and so relevant even today on so many other levels. You can use this for, it doesn't have to be AIDS, it can be anything, any sort of thing that we're dealing with on a grand social level, but it's this, I think, him showing that sometimes these things just are never completed.
To me, all these pinholes, what it shows is they're signifiers of time. How many times he's worked on this, put it up, taken it down, moved it around, constantly working with it. And it's one of the aspects of his works and the drawings that really, you can tell right away the duration that he's been involved in the practice, and how a piece, he's not just in and out. He's returning to it, he's reconsidering the work, adding to it, changing it.
Yeah, and I think that's this constant thoughtful process, just like the candle. The candles we talked about here. This was another drawing that he'd done also in 1990. And trying to just now notice this, because this one's signed or initialed and dated 90, and this one too. The candles again reappear, and then also this is a small ink rendering and pencil. Ink wash and rendering. And again, he loves this sort of layering of imagery. And you can see these candles here are just sort of faintly put in. And then there's one here that's like a votive, and it has AIDS written on it. And it's the Hebrew here. And as we mentioned, he's Jewish, was Jewish. Kaddish, which is a prayer, a daily prayer, and sanctification, which was sort of interesting in how he viewed the candle symbolically in regards to HIV and AIDS. But again, it's just that it's this thoughtfulness, the reoccurrence of themes. He just didn't do something episodically. Everything was always very thoughtful and very personal and meaningful to him. And it was, and so when he put something down on paper or constructed it, it was intentional and it was another documentation for him, I think. He was really into documenting things. It became very apparent, which you wouldn't think when you think about the way he lived, and as you said, the way things were sort of not totally organized in his studio and what have you. But he was really a sort of a chronicler. Sorry. Sort of a recorder of his friends and his life.
Mm-hmm.